In this video, we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And the most important updates are coming from the United States of America, where the 47th president of the United States of America, Donald Trump, made ultimatum to Russia and to Vladimir Putin. Let's discuss this article in details. I'm not looking to hurt Russia. I love Russian people and always had a very good relationship with President Putin, and this despite the radical left's Russia, and many other things. We must never forget that Russia helped us win the Second World War, losing almost 60 million lives in the process. All of that being said, I'm going to do Russia, whose economy is failing, and President Putin a very big favor. Settle now and stop this ridiculous war. It's only going to get worse. If we don't make a deal, and soon, I have no other choice but to put high levels of taxes, tariffs, and sanctions on anything being sold by Russia to the United States and various other participating countries. Let's get this war, which never would have started if I were president, over with. We can do it in the easy way or the hard way, and the easy way is always better. It's time to make a deal. No more lives should be lost. So during this statement, Donald Trump made a lot of mistakes, but it's not maybe mistakes. I believe that he made them for a reason, and the most important is not just that Trump was trying to push Putin and to force him to surrender or something like this. It's not about sanctions. Russia have been living in sanctions for the previous 10 or 20 years, and during the Soviet period of time, Russia lived in sanctions as well. So it's not a very big problem for Russia, and they will find a solution how to make everything work. But the biggest problem, as I understand, is that the United States of America and Donald Trump tried to force Russia to accept everything Western, to accept and to forget its own history. You know that Trump says that we must never forget that Russia helped us win the Second World War, losing almost 60 million lives in the process. And as for me, this is the biggest mistake that was made by Donald Trump during this statement. Because according to Russian understanding of the history, the Soviet Union won the Second World War. The Soviet Union, losing almost 60 million lives, won that war, and the Western countries, including the United States of America, United Kingdom, and many other countries, were helping Russians and Soviet Union to win that war. And this is the biggest mistake, because according to this statement, Putin should accept that the United States of America won and the Western countries won the Second World War, and the Russians were just helping them to do this. And Putin will never accept this, because this is completely different understanding of the situation, of Soviet understanding of the situation. This statement not just forced the Russians to accept the Western realities, but this statement forced Russia and Putin to reject his own history. By the way, Putin's father, died during the Second World War, and now Donald Trump wants to say that Putin should accept that his father was helping the United States of America to win the Second World War, and he, lost his life during this process working for the United States of America. Putin will never accept this, and this statement was made at the beginning of this ultimatum, and when I get just this part, I realized that maybe even Putin didn't read further to the bottom, because everything was wrong since the beginning. So let's wait and see what the Russians are going to do with this, but according to information we have, these days, another interesting and very important blogger is going to come to the United States, to Russia. We're talking about Lex Friedman. I remind you that he interviewed Zelensky several days ago, and according to information we have, he announced a visit to Russia to interview Putin. And most likely Putin will make lots of interesting statements about Biden, of course, about former president of the United States of America, about Donald Trump, about Zelensky, and many other things. And most likely during this interview, we will get the final understanding whether the Russians are going to accept ultimatum or they will fight till the last, as they were fighting during the same Second World War. Now let's discuss the situation in Europe, and we see that the United Kingdom is preparing itself to fight with Russia after the end of the conflict with Ukraine. The West is preparing for war with Russia after the end of the Ukraine conflict, that was stated by the Times. The British Ministry of Defense claims that after the settlement of the Ukraine conflict, there will be a revival and restoration of Russia. And of course, the Western countries will never accept this and will never allow this, or will try to do everything they can, but not allow the Russians to revive itself and to restore itself. There will be a race of different military race, weapon race, another part of Cold War, and many other things. So this information was stated and confirmed by different sources. So let's wait and see what is going to be next, of course. But we have lots of talks, lots of statements made about Zelensky, about the contingent, about the peacekeeping contingent, and he said that the most important, that when talking about this peacekeeping contingent, that the United States of America will take a part of this. Earlier, Zelensky said that at least 2,000 Western peacekeepers would be needed to guarantee security after the war in Ukraine, and several thousands of US troops should be a part of this contingent, also according to Zelensky. Of course, this is another thing that Russia will never accept, because it doesn't matter whether there is a contingent of the Western countries or the NATO presence along the line of combat contact. It's the same. It means that sooner or later, in 10, 20 or 30 years, Ukraine will join NATO, and then Russia will face very huge problems. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's talk about the South Donetsk direction, where the Russians continue the encirclement and the clearing of the settlement of Velyka Novosilka. During the previous 24 hours, we had several changes on the ground. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 22nd of January, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 23rd of January. As you can see, just several streets were captured and taken by the Russians, and the most important, that the control over these streets allowed the Russians to cut the Velyka Novosilka in two. Now, the southern part of the settlement and the central and the northern are two different areas. The southern part is already completely cut from the mainland, and the Ukrainians that are currently located on this territory have no possibilities to evacuate and to escape the cauldron or surrendering. The northern Ukrainians, the Ukrainians that are located in the northern part, still have chances to evacuate, but suffering huge losses. And during the previous night, the Ukrainians made another attempt to cross the river of Mokry Yaly with the purpose to escape the encirclement, but the Russians discovered the positions and the place where the Ukrainians were trying to cross the river, and then the Russians began bombing and attacking this territory with artillery, with FPV drones. It's very difficult to understand whether the Russians managed to destroy the entire evacuation group, but obviously the Ukrainians suffered huge losses. The Russians controlled the river of Mokry Yaly completely, and probably the losses when trying to cross the river by the Ukrainian side can get up to 100%. Furthermore, the Russians continue offensive operation in the most northern part of Velyka Novosilka. Also, during the previous night, the Russians began bombing and attacking this territory with multiple launch rocket systems, with Soslem tower systems. The Russians understand that until the Ukrainians in this area have possibilities to escape or some roads to the river without even small chances to survive, they will continue doing this. But the Russians, first of all, needs media victory. They want to publish thousands of, let's say, prisoners of war from the Ukrainian side. So, which means that most likely during the next day, during this upcoming day, the 23rd of January, the Russians will try to attack in this direction with the purpose to cut the northern part, to cut the northern farms, several streets, and then there's going to be 100% cauldron without any chances for the Ukrainians for evacuation. So let's wait and see what is going to be next. As for the Kurakhova direction, during the previous 24 hours, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions a little bit in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Yantarne. So as you can see, these are the changes on the ground, according to information we have from different sources. Also, according to information we have, during the previous night, the Ukrainians tried to counterattack the Russians from the settlement from Dachna in the eastern direction with the purpose maybe to answer Kurakhova power station. I don't know what was the main purpose of the attack that you can see right now in front of your screens. What exactly the Ukrainians were trying to achieve? Maybe they were just trying to slow down the Russians and to win some time for evacuation from the settlement of Dachna itself. But even in this video, you can see how the Russians were controlling the movements of Ukrainian vehicles. They saw how the Ukrainians were landing, and when the Ukrainians began landing operation, the Russians began bombing and attacking them. And as a result of this fast lightning counterattack, attack without no purposes. The entire group of the armed forces of Ukraine was destroyed. Now let's move further. According to information we have, the Russians continue the outflanking operation. They're getting closer and closer to the Andreevka fortified area. The Russians are using the broad front line attack and the Ukrainians are retreating. Now let's move further. The battles in the Dnipro direction continue. Today, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the southern part of Novoandreevka. This part of the village was captured by the Russians according to neutral and pro-Ukrainian sources. Now let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. The Russians most likely managed to repel every single attack that was carried out by the Ukrainians during the previous 48 hours, and after the Ukrainians were completely defeated, the Russians continue advancing further in the northern direction with the purpose to take under control the mine of Pokrovska. At least according to sources, according to pro-Russian, neutral and pro-Ukrainian sources, the Russians managed to take under control additional 3 lines, and the Russians, according to pro-Russian sources, managed to establish complete control over these facilities. So they managed to get a little bit closer to the main Ukrainian positions in this area. As for the city of Pokrovsk, during the previous 24 hours, we've seen no changes. Another important direction is the Konstantinovka direction, and according to different mappers, the Russians managed to take under control the settlement by the name of Baranovka. If you remember, yesterday the same information was provided as by pro-Russian resources, and today neutral resources confirmed this information. As for pro-Ukrainian sources, they confirmed this information, but it's not complete. The pro-Ukrainians are saying that the Russians managed to reach the outskirts of the settlement of Baranovka, but yet haven't captured the settlement completely. From the deep state updates, the very interesting details are coming from the settlement of Zelene Polye. I would like to point your attention to this gray zone between the settlement of Baranovka and Zelene Polye, and according to this, currently the Russians are trying to outflank the Ukrainian positions and to take Zelene Polye even before the beginning or the finishing of the battle for Baranovka. So all these things, all these maneuvers tell us that the Russians are planning to advance in this area further in the northern direction. Now let's discuss the situation in the city of Toretsk. According to information we have, the Russians most likely began the final assault operation. In this video we can see how the Russians using the TOS flamethrower systems were bombing and attacking the most northern part of the mine, the last bastion of the armed forces of Ukraine in this direction. Most likely after these heavy strikes the Russians began the ground operation. Currently there are very heavy clashes, or maybe by the time you watch the video the Russians will secure this territory completely, and maybe the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation will confirm this information. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Liman direction. Today the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their position significantly. At least this information was provided us by pro-Russian and neutral resources. The Russians continue advancing, taking under control more and more strongholds in this direction. As soon as the Russians are able to take as many as possible strongholds, then they will see no problems to move further in the direction of Kolodzy. The Ukrainians are losing their battle, they're losing the battle for the Liman, and it's very difficult to understand what exactly is going to be next. And the most important updates are coming from the northern Kupiansk direction, where the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions significantly. According to information we have, the Russians captured the Plosky forest, the Russians took under control positions to the south of Zapadne, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the vicinity of Dvorichne. As for pro-Ukrainian sources, today they stated that the village of Dvorichne was captured by the Russians completely. So the situation for the Ukrainians is very difficult, and summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion that currently the Russians control already everything that is located inside of this red line. And the sources are saying that when the Russians will consolidate and collect critical mass, they will continue advancing further in the southern direction with the purpose to attack the settlement of Blagodatovka. If the Russians are able to take everything in this area, this will allow the Russians to encircle the city of Kupiansk, and this is going to be the end of the battle for this territory. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.